Picture waking up to the sound of water. Not rain on the window, water inside your house, rising fast. In the pitch dark of a March night, the Gulf of Mexico is flooding your living room. You grab your children and climb onto furniture as waves crash through the walls. The electricity died hours ago. You cannot see anything. You can only feel the cold water rising around your ankles, then your knees, then your waist. This was not a hurricane. There was no name, no warning siren, no evacuation order. This was just Friday night, March 12th, 1993. 2 days earlier, you had been wearing short sleeves. Temperatures were in the 70s across Tennessee and the Carolinas. Kids were playing outside after school. Windows were cracked open to let in the spring air. Dogwoods were starting to bloom in Georgia. Everyone thought the winter was over. So when the weathermen started talking about a historic storm, people nodded, smiled, and went about their business. A blizzard in mid-March? This is the South, for heaven's sake. Blizzards belong to Minnesota and Montana. Not here, not us, not now. They were wrong to doubt. What descended on America over those 3 days would become the most devastating winter storm of the 20th century. From Cuba to Canada, from the Gulf Coast to Maine, 130 million Americans found themselves trapped, stranded, frozen, and fighting to survive what they later called the storm of the century. If you lived through March 1993, you remember exactly where you were. The smell of candle smoke and kerosene. The sound of branches snapping under impossible weight. The feeling of absolute isolation from a world that had simply stopped. You remember all of it, and you will never forget. It started forming over the Gulf of Mexico on that Friday morning. 3 separate weather systems, a cold front plunging down from Canada, a disturbance drifting east from the Pacific, and warm, moist air surging up from the tropics, all collided and merged into something meteorologists had never quite seen before. Not a hurricane exactly, but with a central pressure you would normally find in a Category 3. Not just a blizzard, but one that would spawn tornadoes, storm surges, and lightning like the 4th of July. A monster that defied classification, that did not fit in any textbook, that would rewrite the rules for what winter could do. The National Weather Service had predicted it 5 days out. This was a breakthrough. For the first time in history, forecasters could see a storm this massive coming nearly a week in advance. They warned that something unprecedented was building. They begged people to prepare. But across the South, folks just shook their heads and laughed. A blizzard in Georgia? 2 feet of snow in Alabama? Come on now, this is the South. In Birmingham, a father told his 11-year-old daughter they would not see any snow that winter. It was late February, practically spring. Snow season was over. Just 2 weeks later, on that Friday night around 10:30 p.m., he stood at the window watching flakes the size of cotton balls, falling so thick you could not see across the street. He told her they were watching history. She looked up at him with that serious face kids get and said, "Daddy, you told me we would not get any more snow this year." By Saturday morning, Birmingham was buried under 13 inches. The city had never seen anything like it. Trees that had survived 50 winters snapped like matchsticks. Power lines came down across every neighborhood. The temperature plunged to 2 degrees Fahrenheit in Alabama. Cars that people had parked on the street Friday night had vanished entirely by Saturday, just white mounds in a white world. Down in Florida, it was far worse. Around midnight on March 13th, a wall of storms roared ashore along the Big Bend coast. Winds topped 110 miles per hour. Over 59,000 lightning strikes lit up the sky in just a few hours, turning night into a strobing nightmare of blue and white. 11 tornadoes touched down across the state. Boats at marinas were lifted and thrown like toys. A 23-foot sailboat at the Davis Islands Yacht Club in Tampa was tossed 300 feet when a waterspout became a tornado. At Jacksonville International Airport, a Boeing 737 was pushed 40 feet across the tarmac. But the real killer was the water. A 12-foot storm surge, higher than most hurricanes produce, swept into Taylor County without warning. There had been no evacuation order, no time to run. Families were asleep when the Gulf came for them. One survivor, just 12 years old at the time, remembers holding on to 2x4s in his flooding home as waves crashed through the walls. The power was out. The darkness was total. When the water would rise, they'd jump to keep their heads above it. And here is the thing that haunts him still. The water was actually warmer than the freezing air outside. They would go underwater just to escape the cold. Can you imagine choosing to submerge yourself because the air would kill you faster than the sea? 13 people drowned that night in Taylor County alone. 47 died across Florida. More people drowned in this single storm than in Hurricanes Hugo and Andrew combined. The surge and the tornadoes destroyed 18,000 homes. And yet, Florida was just the beginning. As Saturday dawned, the storm raced up the eastern seaboard like a freight train. Snow began falling across Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, and kept going. Not gentle flurries. Heavy, wet, relentless snow, falling at 2 to 3 inches per hour. Blizzard conditions from Alabama to Maine. The entire East Coast grinding to a halt. In the Great Smoky Mountains, Mount LeConte disappeared under 5 feet of snow. Drifts piled up to 14 feet at Mount Mitchell. Syracuse, New York recorded 43 inches. Even places that knew winter, that thought they were ready, found themselves overwhelmed. And then, the power went out. 10 million households plunged into darkness. In some places, it stayed off for 2 weeks. No heat, no light, no way to cook, no refrigeration. Not that it mattered when the whole world was a freezer. No way to call for help. Remember, this was 1993. No cell phones in most pockets. No internet. No Twitter to check for updates. No apps to tell you when the roads would clear. Your connection to the outside world was a battery-powered radio, if you had one, and if you had remembered batteries, and maybe a landline phone that worked if the lines were not down. For many families, the only news came from Chattanooga's country music stations, broadcasting updates between songs. Unfortunately, this was peak achy breaky heart era. Small price to pay for knowing you were not alone. People burned whatever they could find to stay warm. Newspapers, broken furniture, old magazines, fence posts, anything that would catch and hold a flame. The smell of smoke hung over neighborhoods for days, mixing with the sharp, clean scent of snow. Families who had not spoken to their neighbors in months suddenly found themselves knocking on doors, sharing coal, sharing food, sharing body heat in the one warm room they could manage to keep above freezing. Every major airport on the East Coast closed. Every single one. From Halifax, Nova Scotia, to Tampa, Florida, not a plane in the sky. It was the largest number of weather-related flight cancellations in American history up to that point. Passengers who had been connecting through Atlanta, Charlotte, or Philadelphia found themselves stranded in terminals for days, sleeping on benches, rationing whatever food the concessions could provide. Some people trying to fly home for family emergencies never made it. Others who were supposed to leave found themselves stuck, unexpectedly, in the best possible place, surrounded by the people who loved them. Highways became parking lots, then graveyards of abandoned vehicles. Interstates from Atlanta northward were impassable, some closed entirely, others simply buried. Cars disappeared under drifts. Semi-trucks jackknifed across lanes. Travelers spent the night in their vehicles, running engines for heat until the gas ran out, then walking miles through the howling storm to find shelter at truck stops, churches, anywhere with walls and maybe warmth. Some walked 5 miles, 10 miles, through snow that came up past their waists. They arrived frozen, exhausted, and grateful to be alive. The Coast Guard rescued more than 160 people from ships caught in seas running 65 feet high. 65 feet. Waves tall as a 6-story building. At least one freighter sank. 48 souls were reported missing at sea and never found. But here's what people remember most about March 1993. It isn't just the terror. It isn't just the numbers. It's what happened in the spaces between the tragedy. In Rome, Georgia, which the national news would later call Ground Zero for the blizzard, the community came alive in ways nobody expected. Radio stations broadcast around the clock, telling people where to find kerosene, who had firewood to give away, which phone numbers to call for emergency help. Georgia power workers drove through impossible conditions. Firefighters and police pushed through drifts chest high. Restaurants figured out how to serve hot meals to work crews without electricity. Churches set up makeshift kitchens. Anonymous strangers with trucks and chainsaws showed up to clear trees from roads, from driveways, from crushed rooftops. People bought space heaters just to give them away to families without heat. In Northwest Georgia, a 6-year-old girl was walking with her family to reach friends who might have heat. She stepped into a ditch completely hidden by snow and disappeared up to her neck. Her father dug her out, then carried her on his shoulders for 3 miles through the storm and 3 miles back. Years later, she'd say it was one of the best memories of her childhood. No phones, no internet, no distractions. Just family. In East Tennessee, hundreds of people found themselves stranded in the Smoky Mountains. Helicopter crews and volunteer pilots spent days airlifting emergency food supplies to families cut off from the world. They rescued over 200 hikers, including dozens of high school students from Michigan who had been on a camping trip when the storm hit. 5 feet of snow and no way out except straight up. Children, of course, thought it was magical. When schools closed, and they closed for a week or more in many places, the frozen world became the greatest playground they had ever known. Kids who had never seen more than an inch or 2 of snow in their lives suddenly had 2 feet of it in their backyards. Sleds made from whatever was handy. Plastic storage bins, cookie sheets, pieces of cardboard, anything that would slide. Snowball fights that lasted entire days. Snowmen taller than houses. Igloos built in front yards. Some kids tunneled into drifts and built snow caves that would have terrified their parents if anyone had been paying attention. They came home soaked and frozen and grinning. Wool socks stiff with ice, mittens that would take days to dry. Parents worried about keeping them warm, about frostbite, about running out of dry clothes. Nobody worried about screen time or homework or play dates. The world had shrunk to the size of a neighborhood, and in that neighborhood, every kid was out, and every hill was a sledding run, and every drift was a fortress. For children, the storm of the century was not a disaster. It was freedom. In Columbia, South Carolina, a woman went into labor on March 13th. When she arrived at the hospital around 1 in the afternoon, only 2 or 3 other women were in the maternity ward. By 9 that evening, it was completely full. The extreme drop in barometric pressure, the nurses said, brought on labor for dozens of women all at once. Babies were born into the storm of the century before it even had a name. And speaking of what happens when you are stuck home in the dark with nothing to do, 9 months later, the region experienced a mini baby boom. November 1993 saw a notable spike in births across the affected states. Life finds a way, even in a blizzard. The death toll climbed past 300 before it was over. More than 200 in the United States, the rest in Cuba, Canada, and ships lost at sea. Most were not from the cold itself. Heart attacks from shoveling heavy, wet snow claimed victim after victim. men in their 50s and 60s, who thought they could clear their driveways like they always had. Car accidents on icy roads. People who ventured out and got disoriented in whiteout conditions, walking in circles until the cold took them. The elderly and vulnerable who could not get help in time, who sat alone in freezing houses waiting for power that would not come. At least 50 people died at sea, on boats caught in waves as tall as a 6-story building. One freighter went down. Others sent distress calls that could not be answered in time. The Coast Guard performed more than 160 rescues, pulling people from fishing boats, cargo ships, and pleasure craft that should never have been out there but had no warning of what was coming. But the number would have been far higher without the warnings. For the first time, the National Weather Service's new forecasting technology had proven itself. 5 days advance notice of a superstorm. Blizzard warnings issued 2 days before the snow began. It was not perfect. Warnings did not reach everyone, especially along the Florida coast, where the surge took so many lives. But it marked a turning point. A new era where science could see disaster coming and give people time to prepare. The storm finally died over the North Atlantic on March 15th. In its wake, America dug out. Slowly, painfully, mountains of snow that would take weeks to melt. Snow piles and parking lots that lingered into April, gray and dirty but stubbornly there. Power that trickled back neighborhood by neighborhood. Linemen working around the clock in conditions that would have stopped most people cold. Roads that emerged from beneath the white like bones from sand. The National Guard deployed across multiple states. The Red Cross set up shelters. FEMA declared disasters in counties from Florida to Maine. The economic toll reached $5.5 billion, nearly $12 billion in today's money. The second most costly winter storm in American history. Farms lost livestock that had frozen in the fields, crops that had been destroyed under the weight of snow. Businesses shuttered for weeks, while owners waited for power and customers that might never come back. The weight of the snow collapsed roofs across the South, factory buildings and warehouses and garages that had never been designed for such loads. Because why would they be? This was Georgia. This was Alabama. This was supposed to be the land of mild winters and early springs. But the thing about 1993 is that nobody had anywhere to go. No streaming services to binge, no social media to scroll, no food delivery apps to summon dinner. When the power went out and the roads closed, you were alone with the people in your house and the neighbors on your street. And something remarkable happened in that isolation. People talked, really talked. Families played cards by candlelight. Neighbors who had barely waved to each other for years found themselves sharing meals and stories. In church halls and community centers, strangers huddled together for warmth and became friends. The usual barriers, the busy schedules, the distractions, all of it stripped away by snow and darkness. Ask anyone who lived through the storm of the century, and they will tell you the same thing. It was terrifying. It was dangerous. It was miserable in ways that are hard to explain to someone who has never been truly cold, truly trapped, truly cut off from everything they take for granted. But there was also something else, something harder to name. Maybe it was the way communities came together when everything fell apart. The volunteers who showed up with chainsaws and did not ask for payment. The neighbors who shared their last can of soup. Radio announcers stayed on the air for 3 days straight because people needed to hear a human voice. Linemen worked in freezing conditions for weeks to bring the lights back on. Maybe it was the silence. That strange, beautiful quiet when the world stops. No cars, no planes, no machinery. Just snow falling, wind howling, and eventually children laughing. In Florida, they still call it the no-name storm. In the South, it is just the blizzard. Up north, the storm of the century. Whatever you call it, March 1993 changed things. Building codes were rewritten along Florida's Big Bend. Houses went up on stilts. Emergency preparedness took on new urgency across the South. Weather forecasting leaped forward, and lives were saved because warnings came earlier and clearer. But more than that, the storm reminded an entire generation what matters when everything else disappears. Not convenience, but community. Not comfort, but character. Not surviving alone, but surviving together. A father in Birmingham who had said there would be no snow spent Saturday and Sunday playing in it with his daughter. They made hot chocolate over the fireplace when the power went out, listened to the weather radio, and made memories that would last a lifetime. A 12-year-old in Florida survived by holding onto boards while waves crashed through his house. 30 years later, he evacuated ahead of Hurricane Idalia without hesitation. Some lessons you only need to learn once. We live in a different world now. Phones in every pocket. Warning systems that can reach millions in seconds. Central heating, backup generators, and delivery drones. The next storm of the century will find us better prepared in many ways. But something was different then. Something about being truly disconnected from everything except the people beside you. Something about a world where the only way through was together. If you were there in March 1993, you know exactly what I mean. The weight of that snow, the depth of that cold, the way the silence pressed in and somehow made everything louder, the crackling fire, the voices of your family, your own heartbeat. It was not the best 3 days of anyone's life, but for many, it was the most memorable. Because when America shut down, when half the country went dark and cold and still, what emerged from the storm was not just survival, it was each other. Were you there for the blizzard of 1993? Do you remember where you were when the snow started falling, or when the lights went out? Drop a comment below and share your story. Hit subscribe to keep these memories alive. And until next time, hold on to those stories. They matter more than you know.